Folks, we're here. I'm on proper Bavarian. It is the 13th of June. I hear Starfield has been leaked. I wonder when Elder Scrolls 6 comes. But there are more pressing matters. There are more important matters than that. And that is, of course, learning a bit more about the games industry and the people within. I'm here today with Fawn.
Hello.
And Krzysztof.
Hi, everyone.
Let's start it off with an easy question. Have you ever been mobbed for not being named Matt? Because I think that's a question that I have to ask. The name's just too good if you don't have it. I mean, I don't have it. It's difficult to live.
I don't think enough people know what my name is to know that it's not Matt, if I'm honest.
I haven't been out in a year and a half, so I can't really say I have had much opportunity to be mobbed. And Swedes, like coming from Poland and now living in Sweden, Swedes kind of under-deliver on that front, you know, the mobbing part. So no, I can't say I have, but I feel like I've been missing out now that you brought it up.
Yeah, it's a name. I regret it. You know, would be a very weird name here. But you know, hey, my parents didn't have the foresight; they didn't see it coming. Now, with that being said, before we actually jump into the actual content here, which is me talking to you and asking you questions, and then at the later time during the stream, the chat asking questions as we explore again the role of these two in the games industry and in Paradox in particular. I have a question for you too. So we are Hastine of Montagu. We live down there in Brittany, and we have basically infinite troops. Hastine, as far as I understand it, lives to like 106. The question is, where should I try to migrate in the period that this stream lasts? Do something outlandish, if anything comes to mind, on this gigantic map. I can't guarantee I'm going to succeed, but I can try.
I'm kind of tempted to say Africa, you know.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's easy. I'll take that.
Somewhere in Africa, but maybe like Fawn, do you want to like put down a specific region in Africa?
I can't say honestly because any attempt I make to do anything in this game is outlandish because I will probably die within 30 minutes or so.
As it should be. That's the classic standard experience. I'm gonna add to that then. We're gonna go to sub-Saharan Africa. There is a bit of a twist here. You can't sail in, where is it? Coast. There it is. You can't sail like down the coast actually, because the devs were like, if you could sail there, the Norse would raid there, and everybody would complain about it. So I gotta find a way down there somehow.
Like
let's just start out while I do all the preparations. Fawn, and after that, of course, Krzysztof. Who are you?
So I am Fawn, if you didn't already hear that, also known as Rainbow or X-Rainbow. That's a very long story behind that name involving a panic name change on World of Warcraft when I was 15, but that's a story for another day. I'm based in London, and I have two very fluffy cats who hate each other, unfortunately, even though they are sisters, and it's not very sisterly of them in the way they act. I am a huge fan of sim games and survival games, also co-op games when I can majorly troll my friends and potentially kill them when they aren't looking.
I just want to add to that the trolling part doesn't like end only at games. In Fawn's case, let's just clarify that.
Yeah, okay, I am a bit of a troll, I am a bit toxic, but that's usually behind the scenes and no one needs to know.
Yeah, sorry, like NDA information. This isn't live, right?
No, we're not live yet. You can say anything you want. Which Paradox employee do you hate the most?
I will send you a DM later.
I got it.
Because it's a Polish name, so nobody will know how to write it.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Krzysztof, now, who are you?
So, hi guys, I'm Krzysztof. For those of you who feel like adventurous and brave, you can try to pronounce my Polish name, which is Krzysztof. But Krzysztof is how I introduce myself to my colleagues, so you can stick with that. I'm a community manager at Paradox. Both me and Fawn, we are a little bit, I suppose, odd ones compared to most of the community team, which is that most of our colleagues work with individual games of ours. Like many of you probably know Troy, who works with CK3. We don't work with any of the games in detail, particular. Fawn does with CK a little, but both of us work with what we call central communications at Paradox, which means that usually when you see some shitposts made on Paradox Interactive Twitter account or Facebook or LinkedIn, that is probably me to blame for this. And that aside, mostly my responsibility the past few months. What you can point fingers at and say this guy is at least partially responsible was the PDXCON community layer, including mainly the PDXCON Discord, and of course Fawn has also been a huge part of that. And Fawn has cats, I have dinosaurs here, but they are still alive to me.
You are an expert on dinosaurs. That is the one thing everybody learns that interacts with you outside of the Paradox Interactive Twitter account.
That is true. Like I got my way, and we now have a prehistory discussion channel in the Paradox Interactive Discord. Thank you, Fawn, for humoring me with that, but not yet on the main company accounts on Twitter and Facebook. But one day.
Now the interesting thing is, because I actually find marketing, of course, is an adequate term, but I also think community management is something that you don't really find outside of the games industry. At the very least, I can't. I mean, yeah, okay, you got Wendy's tweeting like, "Hey, I'm your cool burger brand," though. But there's nobody outside of the games industry, and it is very common in the games industry, that, you know, would run around and say, hey, we need to have a Discord, or hey, we need to have forums where people can actually discuss things, where we read it, where, you know, the devs read it, and so on, so on. You know, nobody says, I'm going to make a movie, or I'm going to make a TV show, and I really need feedback from the fans. Nobody does that. Everybody already has a full script. It's fully done. Now, this is a different sector. The games industry is gigantic at this point, and only here to grow, really. In this sort of cluster that is this huge community management aspect, you say you don't really work just with one individual game. What are your roles, generally speaking?
Do you want to roll first?
So for me, I'm what's known as a community ambassador for Paradox, although I'm going to quote Krzysztof here and say it's kind of like a junior community manager, because community ambassador isn't really a term that other companies tend to use. It's a bit specific to Paradox. And my role is more sort of being like an assistant to the community manager. So I help Troy with his plans for CK, and I help Krzysztof with his central communications plans. I'm kind of like behind the scenes. So I do a lot of social media. I used to do a lot of Facebook and Twitter, but nowadays I'm mostly focused on Discord, because it's a platform that we have started expanding into. And as you say, it's quite the gaming industry is quite focused on Discord as a platform, because it's a live feed, you know, where players can go and discuss games, and it's really important to us that we can see what people are talking about and how they feel.
I think, like, because Fawn has a tendency to downplay her role a little bit. Like, her contributions to Discord at Paradox are many. I don't know if we want to dive into this now, but OPB, before we finish, ask us to talk a little bit about the Paradox bot. Before we wrap up, and then Fawn can shine even more. And as far as my job goes, so my title is community manager. More of an informal addition to that title is it's a central community manager. I just want to make it clear, this doesn't make me a lead, and doesn't make me responsible for our strategy globally. One thing about Paradox is that not just community team, our company is very decentralized. There is little like a centralized oversight of how things should and have to be done. It's more like we have a overarching culture that dictates how we do things. So I am responsible for our brand on the main Paradox Interactive accounts.
Do you think that's a common thing, just to go into the hierarchy? Is that a common thing in the games industry, or is that something that comes from Paradox? I don't want to call it young anymore. It's 20 years old. You know, it can drive, it can drink. But is that something where you would say that's very common, or rather specific here?
I would say I don't know, because to be frank with you, I am relatively new to the industry myself. Paradox has been my entry point to the games industry. I've been with Paradox for 4 years, first as a community contractor, the way Fawn is currently, and then as an internal employee. So I don't have that much overview of how common this practice is. I imagine that it kind of comes with just companies growing. Paradox has... I would not go as far as say that we are a big company, because when you compare, like, look at Ubisoft, one Ubisoft studio...
Right, but you're not a small company anymore, right? I mean...
Yeah, I would say we are probably a medium-sized publisher. I think the best way to just flatter ourselves a little bit is to say we may not be big, but we are global at this point. So I think this kind of comes naturally as you develop, and especially publishers, I think, have more of a need for a central community team, because then you start thinking about, okay, but what sort of games does Paradox publish? What sort of games does Paradox make? And there needs to be someone who is thinking about that, about how we present the idea and the core of a Paradox experience rather than just products on their own. So me and Fawn and some other people above and below me, we come together, we discuss this a little bit. I actually have some internal documentation that I can't show, where we have tried to draft a few bullet points about what our pillars are. Those actually you can access publicly on our website, the Paradox Game Pillars, but also in terms of our values, who we are as people, what are our priorities when listing games, publishing them, and developing them. And that is something that I try to, when talking to people on Twitter, Facebook, that I try to impart, that it's replayability, as long as it's replayable, as long as there is depth, as long as there are stories for our players to say, and as long as there is room for some post-release support. Hashtag DLC love. It's odds are this is a Paradox game, or it could be a Paradox game. Yeah? So that is kind of what we are tasked with. But then this is like a general day-to-day part of our operations. Then we come to more of central events and activities like PDXCON.
The larger planning, right? Because I think from the outside it's a bit difficult to like take a look at, but there is basically a great marketing plan, let's call it that, behind it, right? Behind the big projects, definitely behind PDXCON. I mean, maybe you whipped it up in a week, but I would be very surprised. I would reckon there's a lot more going on there. How does that, you know, because I know, and I want to actually like jump into that topic if we can. I know that the Discord of PDXCON, because I was partially involved, you involved me, the PDXCON Discord before PDXCON happened had, I want to say like 10,000 keys or something to hand out, where essentially people can participate, and there was a daily challenge. If you missed it, by the way, I want to point that out. You wouldn't believe how many people have posted in my vicinity, hey, I got like 5 keys from this, because, you know, they just kept entering every day, and of course there's luck involved, and there's so many keys involved that there's a pretty high chance of getting something. How did that come to be? Because of course it's a big engagement thing, right? There's a lot of people involved there, not just with getting the keys or planning it, but also from the community side that are involved in that.
You've done it now. You've asked Krzysztof about his baby, the treasure hunts, and the
yes. But I will let you talk from, because this is where we talk about the bot, right?
Oh yeah, feel free. Yeah, that's a good topic.
Yeah, so as I said, the treasure hunt is Krzysztof's baby, but whilst we knew how we wanted to implement it, it was different when it came to actually implementing it, because doing things manually, you know, giving out tens of thousands, or sorry, just thousands of keys is a lot of work, and not something that anyone is going to have the time to do manually, which is where we had to look at Discord bots. And the great thing about Discord is the fact that you can do pretty much anything you want to do with it if you have a bot that is capable of doing such actions. So for us, the PDX bot was crucial to kind of distributing keys and managing the giveaways that we did for the treasure hunt. So for those of you who were around and saw our giveaways, all you had to do is, you know, click a little emoji and you were entered, and then the challenge took place, which was more of a manual thing that Krzysztof had designed. You know, we had to we asked the players for submissions, so, you know, draw a picture of a platypus, or tell us your favorite book, for example. And when we reached enough submissions, we then released the next stage of the challenge, which was to find a keyword somewhere on the internet. And when someone found that keyword and typed it in, the bot would recognize it, and then the prizes would begin being distributed randomly to those who had entered. And Discord obviously has its limits. We had some issues with throttling. You know, the bot can only perform so many actions per minute before it gets rate limited. So we had to figure out how we wanted to address this. And it ended up with the bot taking a good up to 40 minutes to distribute all the keys to all the winners, because it can only message so many people per second. So it was quite an intense period, because it's not something we could have tested in advance on such a large scale. Sure, we could have, you know, had a handful of our volunteer moderators have a test for us, and on a smaller scale, but we had no idea what to expect on the grander scale. Thankfully, nothing broke.
Yeah, that to just highlight this part, which is that the price distribution is what is the challenge. You want to do something for a lot of people, something that was our ambition of the event, which is give something to a lot of people, make it not too demanding, don't demand like a super high quality entry, and make the odds of winning something relatively high. Admittedly, there is always an underlying goal, which was to get people to come to the server, so that at the time of the announcement at the event, we could just ping everyone, hey, here's the announcement show, go there and watch. And while Fawn is saying 40 minutes, in reality, like 40 minutes is a very short period of time, because with open source solutions, we would need to do this manually. We would get a list of, we had 1,700 winners, I think, in that last challenge, that all had to be given prizes. So if we had to do this manually, you would still be doing it probably, even though PDXCON ended like a month ago. So to just maybe highlight one thing that is maybe not obvious about the community management job, is that as like new platforms become developed, especially in case of Discord, there is actually a part that involves some technological development. Really, it's not that we weren't programming the thing, but we actually had to involve a developer to develop tools that allowed us to scale up a community activity, because otherwise we would still be limited like 40 people. And in all honesty, like game keys don't really cost us. They cost us in sales later, but so there is a limit to how many we can give away. But so far, our limit was really logistics, right? We couldn't just give out so many prizes at a reasonable time without having someone spend like hours and hours and hours of time DMing people and being annoying. And thanks to this toy, we had that. And just to add about this, which is because you initially asked about planning, about strategy, right? Which shockingly there is a plan, right? Part of the reason
something that
yeah.
hard to believe, looking at who was it? Was it you on Twitter? I laughed at that for far too long, where the internet broke, and I posted. I can't remember whether it was you or CK3, or whatever. And I said, I want to read Dev Diaries, and instead of angry emojis, it just angry. I'm sorry. It's actually like that was so stupid. I could not stop laughing. But yeah, that was part of the plan, right? We
Absolutely. Like we broke Twitter to get cheap engagement.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
And fuel my KPIs. So the goal we were given, we basically, me, Fawn, and our two other colleagues, Elia and Gabe, they were working with us on delivering the like central community activities for the event. We are given a task to not only have activities at the time of the event, because that was mostly for our individual game teams. Like they were preparing stuff specifically for the event, for the main activation, their panels, all that stuff that you have watched, all the contests and activities they had. And our part was to prepare something more global leading up to the event. And the ask was give us 30 days of activities on Discord, right. Something that leads to PDXCON. So the treasure hunt was a part of that, and we needed to design something that was could accommodate a lot of people and could do it efficiently. And again, this might be a technical thing that might not be super exciting to our viewers, but is actually super sexy to me, which is that we did this with only 2 art assets. We had an artist make them ahead of time. There was this map that those who participated, we had a cool map that was essentially our fancy progress bar. It was being revealed step by step throughout the event. And all we had to do, we had to prepare ahead of time, was go into the file, disable a layer, save it, and we had an asset. And then the other asset was whenever our players were supposed to reveal a tile for the activity, again, we had a separate asset that had a pre-made structure, and we only had to choose which tile was being displayed. So there was actual planning and strategy. If we had to make those assets every day for a month at the time of the event, that would take like a crazy amount of time, crazy amount of work. So sometimes it's not just messing around on Twitter like fast food brands do. But also sometimes there's a little bit of tech involved. Sometimes there's a little bit of planning involved as well.
There's one more thing when it comes to tech. I think obviously that's a topic. I mean, you know, I think it's important to mention at the very least because when it comes to community management of any sort, I think it's seen as a, or you know, as somebody that doesn't understand it, that doesn't interact with it, it's oftentimes perceived as something where you basically sit down and you, as you say, shitpost, right? But there is of course a lot related to numbers because, and I know this feeling very well because as a content creator, I know my stats, basically. I will look at my stats. I know what I'm looking for. I know what is important to me, what tells me much more than even, you know, qualitative feedback. So where somebody leaves a comment, for example. If somebody leaves a comment and says, hey, I love this, but then at the same time, it's like, nobody watched it. I'm like, okay, fair enough. You know, like, I'm happy for you, but obviously this isn't what I was looking for. When it comes to the numbers and when it comes to the technicalities, I also know, I don't know whether this is relevant here because neither of you are working on anything website related, right? But there are, for example, Google offers these in particular, these are SEO's courses, right? So search engine optimization courses where you can learn about that. Does that play a role for you, or is it more related to the direct numbers of the activation? So just to explain it, activation is what you know, is called anything that you really do for engagement, where you interact with the community and so far, so on and so forth. Is SEO, does that play any role, or where does the technicality of, you know, your numbers, your KPIs sort of fall?
So just to quickly like put a little bit of a twist on that question, is that no, we don't work with search engine optimization ourselves. There is a web team at the company that works on that. Usually when you do search engine optimization is when you have specific campaigns. For example, I imagine, I don't know because I was not a part of that team, but I imagine that Victoria team, when they are doing their sign up campaign now, so they are offering a skin.
Right, yeah, that has been a case for all of the games, right? I remember this. It started last PDX, look, 2019. No, it started before that actually. The first time I saw that was
had a few like that. It's we can talk about this in a moment, but what I want to say is that they have a dedicated website for that, and that website is probably having some sort of search engine optimization campaign. It's not so much that the main Paradox website has it. That is not really the case. But when it comes to data, what kind of data we are looking at, what kind of data we are gathering and feeding to our stakeholders, I feel like Fawn is doing that more regularly nowadays than I am. Because Fawn, you are collecting reports, right? Like feedback. So how does it look like nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, I don't specifically look at KPIs at all, but I do gather stats to forward onto Steam. My favorite stat, which isn't actually a stat, is how many emoji reactions my posts get on Discord. You know, I do love to look at, you know, whenever we post an announcement, immediately we just see all the country flags appear as people show where they're from when they read our announcements. But onto serious numbers, the kind of stats that I personally look at is the growth of our Discords, how many messages we're seeing week to week, and also how many servers follow our announcement channels, because it's good to know if it's worth it. You know, the reach of our announcements going to other servers, is it anywhere similar to where our other social platforms might be achieving?
But you were also like pulling a ton of stats for me and for the company about PDXCON in general, right? From Discord. Like I'm trying to remember. I think there was nothing like sensitive there. Can you like talk a little bit about what kind of data we pulled?
Yeah, so we used, well, Discord has its own stats gathering, which is Discord Insights, which although has some really useful information in it, it's also affected by people opting out of data, which can skew your stats. So whilst you might see the server has 40,000 members, the stats tell you it has 35,000, which can be really confusing because it changes week to week when people re-opt in or re-opt out, and it changes past numbers. So you're kind of thinking, did I imagine that stat? But outside of that, we use StatBot for Discord, which is really useful at showing a better breakdown of you know, what channels are popular in your Discords, who your most common talkers are. And when we looked at PDXCON, we tried to see which activities were the most popular. And for example, the treasure hunt was one of our most popular channels purely because, you know, there was a lot of hype in there, even though the channels may have only been active for short periods each day. You know, whenever the activity was accurate, we did see a lot of spam and people, you know, saying keys, you know, that as we tended to joke at the time, it all adds towards our KPIs. You know, the numbers get boosted with the spam. And I know that our moderators had a heart attack at times when we told them, no, we're not going to turn on slow mode because we want the players to hype. We want to see their excitement. And moderators are dying inside, going, no, please don't do this to us.
Shout out to our moderators, you are heroes.
I gotta when it comes to the Discord, I have a bunch of questions related to that. But I would like to have a bit of a double question because we have been talking now about a lot of technicalities, which is a big part of the job, as it turns out. Whether, you know, that is of course something I think where the majority of your job lies or not. Of course, at the end of the day, you still have to come up with campaigns. You have to come up with creative implementations of how something might work. Then there's the big topic of the bot, of course. But with all that in mind, now that we have a basic overview, I would say, about, you know, what the two of you are doing, I think a sort of double question I would like to ask is, how did you enter the industry? And before joining the industry, now that you've worked in it, what would you tell yourself? What do you need to know? What is basically the PSA? You know, what needs to be said going into the industry? Because it's a great, you know, it's a fast growing industry, and it's something where, you know, I think most people don't really have any touch points with it.
We are such terrible examples of this phone. We are like this. This is not how this happens. But you go first, go.
So for me, Paradox was my first official job in the industry. Prior to that, I was doing voluntary work towards communities, which is why I always encourage people to volunteer for stuff and add it to their CVs, because you never know where it can lead you. And it's why for our Discord moderators, we like to say, don't forget to put this on your CV, because it could get you a job one day. And for me, from a young age, I really enjoyed community interaction in games. So I'd make big guilds on online games, or I'd host events for people, server-wide events. And I thought to myself, you know, I really enjoy doing this. I want to take a step further and do it more as a job. So what I personally did was I found a community which was called FreeSo, or Free Sims Online, which was a re-implementation of The Sims Online, which is The Sims 1, but online. And yes, we had permission from EA to do it. And it's quite an old game now. I can't recall exactly how old, 15 years or something. So we brought it up to be more of a modern game, and I did a lot of community stuff there, hosting events. And I thought, you know, I'm really enjoying this. It's awesome. I've been doing this for a year now. I've got some voluntary experience, so maybe I can go and apply for a job somewhere. And as luck would have it, I had a friend who worked at Paradox, and I told them, you know, I really want to take this a step further and potentially get into the industry for a career. And fortunately for me, my friend decided to hook me up with Rod, who some of you probably have heard of as community manager at Paradox, now working in marketing higher up. And Rod and I talked in a call for a bit, and I was basically there just to ask for advice. You know, how do you get into the industry? And so we chatted for a while, and I was shocked at the end of the call for him to say, well, actually, do you want a job? And I said, well, yeah, why would I say no to that? That's an amazing opportunity. And yeah, that's my career at Paradox began, and that was just over 2 years ago now.
For me, it was also a bit of an old one. So I've been a fan of Paradox games for a while. I think my first one, what year did EU3 release in? Was it 2006, 2007? I can't remember, but that was my first game.
EU4? Wasn't it even like 2020?
EU3.
Oh, EU3. Oh yeah, wow, yeah, that's a while ago.
Yeah, so I'm young.
They accept grandpas. It's good to know. It's something that, you know, I got some people in the community that are a bit older, like 65 plus. They will know that even you can make it.
Absolutely. Like, listen, I also talked about this during PDXCON. Let me just quickly talk about it. We have people over 40 who are like community contractors that are starting on their path in this profession. Like, age is not a barrier at all in this industry. But as far as how I started, so Stellaris is to blame. Ever since I started playing Paradox game, I was like, I really like this, but I would really like this in space. You know, like I really want lasers and aliens and not just Habsburgs. You know, So when Stellaris got announced, by the way, it got leaked.
It got leaked. I don't remember
Oh
that.
yeah, it got leaked like a day or 2 days before the announcement. There were screenshots leaked accidentally. So we were like, I was like, oh, someone on Facebook created a fan community immediately, right? I was like, I want to go in there. I want to talk to people, and I started being very active. A few weeks, I became an admin of that community, one of admins, not the only one, and then I spent like a year and a half there just helping build this community. We did some fun events, fun contests. We chipped in with some of our own money, me and other administrators. There was also a nice artist who drew something for us as a prize that we later printed for our contest participants and sent it as a reward. And that got noticed somehow at Paradox. So I'm just sitting there making memes on Facebook. And suddenly I'm getting a DM on Facebook, and it's like, "Hi, do you want to work for us?" Right. So again, that is not how this goes usually nowadays, but that was the entry point for me. I was like, "Damn, of course." I was thinking about applying for a CM job at that point, but I was like super intimidated. Thought I was not ready. And granted, that contracting work 4 years ago, the scope of it looked different to what Fawn is doing nowadays. Like, we have come to integrate our remote community contractors much more nowadays. That was doing actually less, but it gave me an opportunity to learn to later like take up this job fully. Which I think takes us to the second part of the question that you had, which is what kind of advice would we give to ourselves? Fawn, do you want to take it first?
Yeah, sure. So definitely the piece of advice that I'd give myself is quality over quantity. So I think one thing that when you're first entering the industry and you're a mere commoner down at the bottom, you really want to impress everyone, and look like you know what you're doing. So a big part of being a community ambassador is reports, right? And I would write walls of text, walls and walls of text. I would read every thread on the forum, every Steam thread. I would just read it all. I'd be there with bloodshot eyes, like going through all the messages and trying to summarize everything that the community was saying. And at this point, I was working on Imperator Rome. So as you can imagine, there was a lot to write down. And what you don't realize is that nobody wants to read a wall of text. They want a summary of what's going on. And over the past 2 years, I've definitely managed to slice and dice how much I write to be more critical and optimized versions of what the devs and the rest of the team need to know about how the community feels. So if you think you need to do work non-stop, I'll tell you now, less is more.
Yeah, that is actually, if I can, before I answer like my part of the question, I kind of want to use that as an opportunity to talk about something, which is trying to, like, whenever you join the industry, it's the first time you're trying to prove yourself. Like, having worked with a few contractors now, I'm not technically a manager, but I have people working like under my like guidance. What definitely impresses more and is appreciated more is people who know how to manage their own workload in terms of just being efficient and knowing how to avoid burnout and how to highlight this. So I know that you want to work hard when you come in, and I know what it's like, but I will not be impressed just because you do a lot. I would rather you do a little less, but do it like 50% more efficiently for this. So don't go into this like fully guns blazing and trying to do 10,000 things at the same time, because this is a journey, right? This is getting into this industry is just the first step, and you might be a person with a lot of potential, so why wear yourself out so early? And your colleagues, they will understand this because they have all been in that same situation before, and we talk a lot about crunch and burnout this industry, and it's something we need to be discussing more openly and more regularly. And I can say that, obviously there are days where we work harder than others. PDXCON was, for example, a very demanding event for us, but like I told you before this call, I'm now headed off to have 3 holidays. Fawn is being strongly advised to take some soon too, and other people are getting their rest now. So there is a strong pressure and expectation, at the very least within Paradox, that people will get their rest. But to answer the question about the advice, I would actually kind of tie to what I said, which is I would warn myself about the change in pacing, and that is when you are running a fun community, things are a little bit easier in the sense that you are not a part of a big corporate structure. I remember when I was running a fan community for Stellaris, I used to browse, for example, the forums or the website for Stellaris, and there would be a dev diary, and I would just rush immediately, grab the link, post, I posted dev diary. Wow, I did this before Stellaris Twitter posted dev diary, right? What slow pokes they are. And then I started working within Paradox, and then you start realizing that there are reasons why sometimes buttons get pushed later. For example, there might be a partner. Let's say Microsoft is supposed to post something first.
Right.
Or we want to post something when a certain store has listed our product for pre-order. So you need to adjust to the fact that you have colleagues who have their own goals, and your goal is not always to be the fastest, the most responsive, the first to post something. And that took me a while to get used to. Some industries and professions have more of a there's more of a struggle when adjusting to that. I give you an example. I used to be a warehouse worker, so the pressure was often on, you need to every day send a certain amount of goods. Or, for example, people who have come from fast food background, for example, serving clients quickly, ASAP. And it can be a struggle for people like that to adjust to a different pace of working with a very complex structure, because game development, a lot of people say it sounds like a platitude, but it is true. It is very complicated, and the more complicated it is, the more people there are, and things can take some time. So that would be the advice.
From that conversation, I've taken that working in a warehouse confirms you'll be working in the games industry, because I
Absolutely.
also worked in a warehouse at some point, and I became exceedingly buff. And considering how short I am, it was a very weird look.
Oh my god, I had no idea. We didn't talk about this previously.
Surprise!
Buff Fawn. I before we continue, I just want to direct your attention to where we are. Can you find where I am without looking at the screen?
Wait,
I would if my game hadn't
you are,
frozen.
I see you have changed colors a little bit, and your name, and are present in northwest Iberia. Is that correct?
Oh, that's by accident. No, you gotta look further. That's not my real world.
Okay. Are you in Africa then? Let me take a look, because I was not paying
What do you
attention.
take me for that I in this time only make it to Iberia? This is ridiculous.
I apologize. I didn't want to wound your professional pride. Okay. I'm looking for you. A second.
I did. Oh, whoa. Oh, woo, sorry.
This is, I want to stress this, the name is the native name of this location. Okay? Owu is the name of the tribe that we just took.
It's almost perfect. One vowel, like away from being perfect.
We can just fully dress it up. Give me a... Not that I would know. This is how it's done, right? It's like with a little...
Oh my god. Well, you are more of an expert.
You got like the tilde? Got the thing there?
Exactly. This is like the... I will not try to simulate this sound now live on stream, because I don't want to incriminate myself completely. But I do detect a certain level of correct weakness from it. And I think it's a good effort, man. I really do.
So the thing that is of course really interesting to me, because the games industry as a whole, I mean, I usually never name names, whether I have worked with them or whether I want to work with them or not, and I will never work with them, both for the reasons that are obvious, but also for the fact that I will never play those games on the channel. But I mean, there are enough articles I think about stuff like CDPR, for example, and how that can impact workers when it's a permanent crunch situation. I myself haven't worked in a warehouse, surprisingly. I have, as a student job, I've worked in hospitality. I was at the reception, basically, and I gotta tell you, night shift was amazing because nobody's there, not even the boss. You just hang out, you do your few tasks, and then you're good to go for like 8 hours. But I will say it's of course a big factor, right? The entire idea of overworking and the entire idea of not knowing your boundaries, and at the same time your job not enforcing boundaries, right? Now PDXCON is one of those big things where I assume that there was a lot of work done, and in the aftermath, I know, for example, right, that Troy has gone missing until I think mid-month. He's going to return then. So there is more balance in there. I really like the suggestion that people that come into the industry really need to look out for that themselves, regardless of where they are, and that they need to look into that. What do you think is the skill from a warehouse that has helped you most in your new job?
I think for me, honestly, it's dealing with trolls. Because whilst I worked in a warehouse, it was also retail. So whilst in the back I might be packing boxes, I would bring a box to the front to a customer and they'd be mad because, oh, that's the wrong light bulb. I didn't order that light bulb. And, throw a hissy fit and say, oh, I know the manager and yada yada. And I think that definitely helped me to thicken my skin. And, when I now encounter a troll on the internet who is unhappy, whether it just be in general, outside of work, or someone who is angry or upset towards something that I might have done on behalf of Paradox, then I definitely feel I have that thicker skin now. So thank you, Lightbulb Man, for being so mad at me.
Customer service. Lovely.
I have a question for you, Fawn, because this happened to me like twice. It generally happens very rarely. When you were responding to anyone on social media, and someone was unhappy with your response, did anyone ever try to tag our CEO to deal with you? Because it happened to me.
No,
Seriously?
I don't think I've ever upset anyone with a response enough to warrant such.
So it's just me. Okay, shit.
Yeah, I can't believe they do that to you.
What did you do to get that?
I can't remember. It was a few years ago. It was, I think, still when Fred Rester was our CEO. I said something that basically didn't please them. Sometimes we are trying to be honest, and sometimes it's appreciated, sometimes it's not. But that's a part of the job. I think it was, if I remember correctly, I think I know what it was. I think it was the legendary FTO system rework in Stellaris.
Right. Yeah.
Which was
that made a
where
lot of people. Yeah.
Yes, where we reduced the number of FTL options to 1 to encourage more strategic gameplay in terms of warfare.
Yeah.
And that caused a lot of discussions and controversy. Ultimately, my personal take, I think a good call for the game and for its future, as its current success is showing. And we are trying to, I think, explain why we did this and how, just by being transparent about wanting to encourage more tactics in the game rather than just piling and doom stacking onto one another. And I think a few times what happened was that someone was trying to send Fred after the Stellaris account and after Martin, I think, as well. Or was it Johan? I can't remember exactly. But
Johan?
it did. So Johan was at that time, I think, a lead of game directors at PDS. Currently, he's a studio head at Tinto.
Yeah.
So it's been a while. It's been a few years, but it did happen. But kind of segueing into what I learned from the warehouse work, mine was a little bit different than yours, Fawn, which is I didn't deal like with clients at like a front desk. I wasn't handling them stuff, but I was handling more not retail clients. Sorry, it was in Poland. So basically, clients who were buying in bulk, right, through a computer system, and I would say people sometimes tend to demonize our interactions with our fans and with people on Twitter and so on. Like, guys, this is nothing. Like compared to someone who has like a contract with you and feels he's your boss and you owe them everything, which granted, one in like a few thousand players can feel like that, but it's really like an extreme case. But when I was working that job, it was much more frequent. It was like daily, and I think that gave me a little bit of a thick skin, like Fawn says, to when something is more frustration-inducing that you read on Twitter. It's harder to take me off than I would have been before I had that experience, for sure.
Just been reminded by Trinex in chat that there was someone I angered, and we banned them from the Crusader Kings Discord for posting inappropriate content. And they went and tweeted the Crusader Kings account, I believe, if I recall correctly, said I should be fired because I was rubbish at my job. Sorry for banning you for your inappropriate.
I'm glad that didn't happen. I'm glad we kept you around in spite of this.
It was close, though, right?
Outrageous.
I have to assume it was close.
Tragedy. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I banned them. Ashamed.
If we could, because obviously community management isn't anything that goes against the community itself. I personally, and I want to lead with that primarily because I think if anybody feels differently, I think it's perfectly fine. It's a personal sort of engagement there, but I am basically a dictator on my channel. What I mean is, I like to describe it as my store. And if somebody comes into my store and starts insulting other people that are in the store, starts insulting me, or just takes a dump on the floor, I'm not gonna be like, oh, let's talk about this. I'm just gonna ban it. Like that's the way I see it. I'm very radical about it because I nobody has the time to deal with that basically. But that is of course not the majority of what is done on this channel or on the official platforms for Discord or be it on Twitter, for example. When it comes to managing them though, how do you achieve basically, I mean, on Twitter it's a bit harder, I guess, because you don't really have any like freedoms of moderation there, but how do you achieve a friendly community that likes to interact and likes to talk on your respective channels?
So I think for me, with Discord servers, the first few days of a Discord server's life is crucial to how its community will behave for the rest of its life. So for example, when the Crusader Kings server launched at PDXCON 2019, the first thing we unfortunately dealt with was the whole Deus Vault spam. And that was an unfortunate time for us because it definitely affected our Discord negatively. And we had to, shut it down without being, too controlling. And we were really fortunate that, a correction was made in an article which calmed the community a bit. And that managed to kind of return the community to a more of a friendly path. And that has managed to remain since the community are, if you encourage the right sort of behavior, a community will almost build itself in a way. Now that we are like a year and a half into the life of the Crusader Kings Discord, we find that a lot of the players will almost shoo out the trolls themselves, before the moderators even have to step in, which is really wonderful, honestly, that a community can almost look after itself because it knows what the kind of standard behavior has become.
I'll tell you that like your work with our Discords really set foundations for what is becoming our standard in moderation now. It maybe is not applied like globally in all our platforms yet, but the way you essentially kickstarted the CK Discord with some very like clear rules and well, maybe not zero tolerance, but very low tolerance policy. Like I think we have all found that, ideally I would love to have the opportunity and time to talk it out with some people who are misbehaving and try to change their minds about their behavior. But I think unfortunate reality is that as a company is growing and as our community is growing, the numbers of people we are dealing with is just becoming too big to be able to dedicate that kind of time individually to everyone. And unfortunately, maybe fortunately, this does require us to be more strict and more direct and have a more clear a set of rules for how we manage our communities. And this is, I think, best visible on our Discords and with the work Fawn and some of our other community managers have been doing, which I would argue that our Discord communities are probably, Discord for us is probably one of our healthiest sub-communities, at least platform to platform wise. So yeah, good work Fawn with that. But I think because you also asked about other platforms, I can talk a little bit about that, which is Twitter, for example, right? And I would say something that some might find controversial or just think I'm just making stuff up, which I don't think Twitter is that toxic, honestly, as a platform. I think we need to look at it a little more globally, at what other platforms are there and how they behave. So I think on Twitter, what adds to the perception of toxicity are two things. One, everyone is fair game. It's very easy to DM a person, and so when someone gets angry, it can get very personal, and it can be a very direct feedback, and that can add to that feeling. And second is virality on the platform. When something goes, it really goes, right? Someone gets pissed, stuff starts getting retweeted. We all know the term ratioing, right?
I got ratioed once actually by the Paradox account. What the hell? Or was it CK3?
I mean,
I got ratioed because I posted the VTube. There's a mod that adds the VTubers as religions, and I celebrated that mod because of course we celebrate mods, right? And I got ratioed. Can't believe it.
I just want to say I also want to like judge you harshly here for promoting mods with Comic Sans font in them.
Your font mods
I thought those were great.
Worst mods that I've ever seen, and I had to close Twitter because I was so offended.
Right, but yeah, okay. So Twitter has the potential to go bad, but it isn't natively.
I would say it's not like this again. I hope this doesn't offend anyone, but it applies to me because I'm going to be talking about age. And just for the record, I'm from that demographic as well, and it's to me platforms tend to develop more toxicity as they age and as their user bases age. The platform that we have been having some challenges with, and admittedly that is also on us for not having as strict and clear moderation rules for, was our forum. Forums have an issue as a platform, not as a just Paradox community, but as a platform, as a tool, which is that they are fairly insular, they're fairly closed off. There is no huge company like Twitter or Facebook to keep pumping money into this to increase reach and keep getting more people onto them. And it's just natural that, as there is a platform that is hyperactive, which the forums are, relatively the engagement is super high on the forums compared to other platforms, but at the same time there isn't that much growth, not at the same pace as we might be seeing in some other communities. And that sometimes tends to, you stay with the same family for 20 years, you tend to develop some arguments and some issues. And so the age of the platform can show that a little bit. It's also true a little in case of Facebook, which again, I really like the engagement we get on Facebook. It's lovely talking to our fans. The discussions are very deep. When you go outside of official communities to a more closed off groups, and sometimes when you post about something more business oriented or it tends to get a little saltier there. And I think what is interesting is, a lot of people, especially like politicians, really, lawmakers, tend to point to the alleged relationship between anonymity and toxicity, which I think is just not true, because Facebook is not anonymous, and I would argue it's more toxic as a general community than Twitter, for example. Likewise, there is another scale. I would say that Twitter, in terms of like general sentiment, is a little bit in the middle there. And then you have younger platforms where Instagram is pretty chill for us. Discord is pretty chill for us as well. TikTok is like a pretty bubbly community. We have barely any presence there right now.
You have a TikTok?
We don't have a Paradox Interactive TikTok. We have a World of Darkness TikTok. It's when there's a new platform popping up, it needs to make sense for a brand to go there. It makes sense for World of Darkness to be there because World of Darkness is not only games brand but also a lifestyle brand, which TikTok works with very well. And it's as a culture, as a society, just globally, we grow up with those tools, and people who were born in the era of social media in general understand how to behave themselves a little better than people who had to adapt to it. Right? It is true for me as well. I grew up in Poland. I remember internet being made available to me the first time, and I remember my colleagues who were wonderful people, face to face, acting like utter assholes online when interacting with me and others. and it took them some time. So this is why you sometimes see older platforms misbehaving a little more than younger platforms. And to end on a positive note, globally, I really think as a global online community, not just games community, not just products community, I really think we're headed in a good direction, towards a pretty good place. So you don't, like, moderation is a part of the story, but I also think that ultimately with time, moderation will be becoming a little easier because people will understand a little better that those are real humans out there, and what I say can hurt them, and I wouldn't like to be hurt, and so on and so on. So it's going to be good. I really believe that.
So you think that there's a big part that will eventually just establish basically a new framework for what people on both sides expect?
I think so. Again, that will always vary a bit depending on what platform you are on. Because again, we have platforms that are very old and that have established themselves in the period of when the internet was like a Wild West 20 years ago, when the forums were the most popular form of online interaction. The rules on the internet were very different, as in to say there were no rules, almost.
Yeah.
And there is always going to be a little bit of, in that generation that I also grew up in, there is also always going to be a little bit of nostalgia for that time, probably, and a little bit of pushback against harsher moderation, I imagine. But there's going to be some balance found, and there's always going to be a part of some demographics that start to adapt better to new tools and like new platforms. Some people slower, some people faster, but overall that progress is happening. And as Fawn said, we are starting to see members of our communities actually care about how those communities conduct themselves, which is, I think, really a best example of that. Those are our extended families, extended environments, like friends that we have online, and we all want to be there with them in a healthy place, right?
Wait, I'm being blackmailed.
Is the casus belli don't Comic Sans?
I wish. No, this is just the guy on the other end of the world. Because when I hopped over here, basically I took a bunch of land, right, so that I could hop down here. And he just found out that I have an affair and have a child that, doesn't belong to my wife. And then he's like, hey, my messenger traveled for 2 years to reach you, my friend. And I'm here to tell you that I will reveal your secret unless you give me a favor. Kind of a...
Will you succumb to the request?
Yeah, basically. And I, of course, declined. Remember, do not... I get some hilarious spam emails. some great stuff. That is also something that definitely comes with this new age, where there is, of course, a lot of more proficiency, as you say, and then it's a wildly changing thing. Now, the interesting thing here is we talked about the technical side of it, and we also talked about the... Some people are just in my prison, okay. We talked about the technical side, and we talked about the human side in particular. So when it comes to having a thick skin, and what I found really interesting in particular there was the... idea of essentially saying, hey, you need to really start forming and shaping the community in a way that you want at the very start, because otherwise you're just gonna... I mean, there was this really good... I have the same approach, and I would also... it's interesting actually to me how close many things are between content creators, I think, and general community management. I mean, of course, it sort of goes hand in hand, right? Because at the same time, it's always people being interested in something that they all like, and then you have to see how it works. But there was the interesting concept that if a community goes bad, nobody that isn't bad is going to start chatting. Basically, at that point, it is indeed already too late, and at that point, you just have to tell yourself, all right, well, kind of screwed that one up. My question there is, now, not even related to the moderation aspect, but just generally, there, again, you've done so many activations. The games industry seems like something, a bit of an industry of failure, I want to call it, on a positive note, where basically there is a lot of trial and error, and there is a lot of trying new things. I mean, the entire section that both of you work in is basically non-existent in other industries. How do you deal with, be it something that you actually worked on and published, so it went out and it wasn't well received, or how do you deal with situations where you have a concept, and the longer you work on it, the more it becomes obvious this isn't going to pan out? How do you approach that?
So I won't go into any major details here, but there obviously have been times in the past where things haven't gone as we've expected, whether it be due to miscommunication or us just not really understanding how the community would receive something that we've published or pushed. And the way that we approach, handling stuff like that, it can really vary as to what it exactly was that went wrong. But for me in the past, I've been told, sometimes it's best to let the community process what has happened, because we can apologize, but sometimes the community themselves, they just need a little bit of time to process what's happened and calm down, because when people are angry they can say things that they don't mean, and if you approach a situation and you're not in the right head, you can say things that you will regret, right? Whether it be from the community side or the players communicating with us side. So sometimes it's better to just, sleep on it and think about it the next day, and how you might handle it then with a clearer head.
Yeah, and what you said, OPB, about when the community is angry, the more constructive parts of the community tend to fall silent, right? Because sometimes the causes they want to avoid arguing with others in the comments, or admittedly, not every time like they can notice we screwed something up as well, but they don't want to pile on top of us because we are already getting trashed online. So I would just sit this one out. So thank you for that, by the way, guys, when you do that. But it is, I would say, I agree to a degree with what you said about, once we get to this point, it's a bad sign. But I would also argue that usually when something goes really bad, it tends to have a wider reach. It makes a bigger splash and reaches outside of our community. And what I have found, I don't know if it's the same for you, Fawn, but especially on the central channels, usually the most negative feedback, the most anger comes from people who are not a part of our core community. Usually the part that is the most toxic are people who, well, they live for this stuff. There are people who, someone made a video on YouTube, Paradox screwed this or that up, right? So someone comes Googling, right, looking for the comms and venting their frustration. Sometimes it's one of our fans. Sometimes it's someone who is just frustrated with the games industry as a whole and sees something in what we did that is embodiment of that issue, right? So, and what this means for us is that a lot of that negativity is usually very temporary, because when it's people who are not a part of our core audience, it usually they spend like a day or two venting their anger and then they move on until the next opportunity comes by. I realize this is a little bit of a cynical approach, and what I want to say is this doesn't lead to us ignoring the negative feedback. There is a reason why we have an army of community managers and community contractors looking for that feedback and moving it forwarding it to our colleagues. But there needs to be some awareness, and this is why we have people, I quote it, on the ground, working directly with our community, with our social media, like Fawn, like some of our other community ambassadors, who can differentiate. Yes, there is a lot of negativity. Our core audience is frustrated, but they are not ready to set us on fire just yet, right? But we need to fix this, and that. And it would be more of an issue, I would say, a very bad warning sign. If I suddenly saw a lot of names that I recognize, that I see regularly, right, changing their tone into something toxic. Because, and just to be clear, it's okay with someone who is like very involved in our community when they are critical. That is, of course, something we need to hit to. So what I'm saying is, it's not bad when we see that our community is critical from the community management perspective. It's more, what tone does this harsh criticism take? That would be probably a thing that I wouldn't like to see. But I would also say, I don't think we have really seen that much, not in an extended form. So I would say, just to sum up what I always say about our community, I feel we have a pretty good relationship. Like an outsider might look and not see that, but us working with our fans closely, I would say we are probably one of the healthier communities out there, and I really do mean that. Not just corporate propaganda, guys. I promise.
I mean, it's definitely one of the more involved company to community anyway. Especially looking, I mean, again, names don't really need to be named, just because if you are part of the community, then you will see that. Whether you are on the side where you say this is all perfect or not is something else, of course. But speaking of community feedback, of course, there are difficult times. I think Fred put it on Twitter a while ago, where he essentially said that he fully understands that many of the fans, because Grand Strategy is niche and Grand Strategy is in a very particular place, and I mean, World of Darkness is also, I think, niche in a different way. It is much broader in how it's distributed, but at the same time, it's something where there's a lot of very dedicated people, a lot of people that are fans, that are part of the community, that have been there for ages. Now that I want to use it as a segue, basically, out of the what happens if and into the how do you do and how do you what essentially is the role that you can play between the dev team behind the scenes and the community. So I know, and I think I can't remember whether Victoria 3 has done one already, but CK3 before release has had a steady flow of Q&As, for example, right? And then there's of course a lot of feedback that you see just as you go through platforms. What sort of role does that play, and where does that come into play in general?
So with CK on all Paradox games, really, it is quite important to kind of have a middleman between the community and the developers, aka us, because the developers, they're very popular amongst the fans, obviously, because they made the games that the fans love. And this can result in the devs almost being swarmed. If a dev drops into Discord and says hi, the fans and the players are obviously usually very excited to see them, and they'll have tons of questions for them and feedback to share. And obviously, whilst the devs are happy to have people approach them and tell them what they think, the devs themselves are only human, right? So a dev has their own opinions, and they might say that's a good idea, but the community takes that as, okay, this feature is confirmed, right? And that's not how it works at all. And it can make it difficult for devs to want to interact, because they're afraid, that the community might take what they've said as gospel, right? So when we have features like, for example, the feedback channel on the CK forum, where users can come in and post what they think about the game, and other users can then upvote or downvote that feedback, and we on a weekly basis we read all of it, and we forward the most commonly upvoted feedbacks to the devs. That's perfect for the developers to see that form of feedback, because it's it's on neutral ground, it's unbiased, and it's what the community think, without the extra addition of them saying, by the way, I love you, you're my favorite dev, and making the dev feel guilty, that that was attached to the feedback. But the devs do read all this feedback, and it's really important to them. And I've heard a lot of great feedback from the devs that they really appreciate hearing exactly what the community have to say. In terms of the Q&As, they have definitely been a super beneficial thing to have. We did them pre-launch of CK, but as we got to the final Q&A before CK came out, we were kind of overwhelmed with how many questions the community had, and we didn't have PDX bot then. We had a smaller custom bot for Q&As, and that was almost overwhelmed, I suppose, with questions. And we obviously want to do Q&As, and we are starting to do them in more servers now that we have PDX bot with its fully functioning Q&A system. And I know that a lot of players are super excited to take part in them, right? Because it's your chance to not get an instantaneous answer, but instead of posting on the forums and hoping that a dev might answer in a week or two, that here's your chance right now to potentially get your burning questions answered. And I think it's brought the community a lot closer to us in terms of some of our games, because they definitely feel we listen and we're here to answer their questions.
Actually, want to add to what you said, Fawn, which is how exactly this feedback gets turned into actionable changes, and why some feedback is essentially becomes features or tweaks, and why some doesn't. Which is we are a big part of processing that feedback for our developers. Sometimes our devs go on social media and they are not as widespread as we are, as in some of our developers prefer Discord, some hang out only on the forums, some hang out only on Twitter, right? And they can have a bit of a platform bias, surprisingly, or maybe not. People preferring a certain platform over the other tend to have also a bit of a different preferences in their gameplay habits, and can give feedback that is very varying. So it's important for us to contextualize this. So the community team gathers that feedback from as many platforms as we can and tries to give like a general community sentiment. But that is only part of it. The other part is metadata, for example. And before someone gets conspiratorial, we don't actually like get personal data of our players unless they like provide us with an email when we send them a newsletter. Metadata is more general numbers. For example, how many players turn on this game during that time interval? How many played this country? How many played that country? How long did they play before they dropped off on average? That is also a very important part of feedback. It's I would argue the only way to collect feedback from fans who are not as deeply involved in our community, as for example you are, OPB, or some of your viewers, people who just bought our games and just played but never talked to us. This is the only way for us to
not actually utilize any way of
Exactly. So that is also a big part of it. Another part is user research. Sometimes we can like order user research on a specific subject. Then the beta tests, which I know some of our fans have sometimes thought that we are not doing any beta tests. We are. They are usually done with a very focused purpose for a very specific reason, to analyze something. So there are all those funnels of information coming into the dev team, and then the development team with a project manager and other stakeholders, other people in the team. They look at it, they look at the volume that came from this source, from that source, and try to divine from that mix of feedback together what should be done actually. Which is why sometimes it might seem that your feedback wasn't heard. It's just sometimes your feedback is in the minority, even though in your particular section of the internet, of the community, it might seem like it's in the majority. Admittedly, just to be clear, that is not the only reason. Sometimes why feedback doesn't get heard are simply resources, priorities, right? Different games are sometimes at different stages in their development cycle, in their life. I'm not saying that, the older game gets the less priority it gets, but for example, what can happen is a new project gets greenlit in the company, and a part of a dev team from one game gets moved to it, and then there is a dip essentially in productivity for a certain product. So during that time, for example, in the middle of life of a certain game, the team just can't introduce as many features as they would like to, right? Which is why sometimes some fixes come late, and again, not because the feedback wasn't heard, because there were other things that had to be prioritized and resources were limited for X or Y reason. And before new hires, I'm sorry, I think you might be hearing some sirens outside of my window.
I'm not hearing anything right now.
Okay, that's perfect. So those are all the reasons why sometimes that feedback might feel like it's not being heard. But you also asked about. So now let me try to answer this question. How what is essentially our role between the devs and the fans, which is my role is not between the devs and the fans at all, because I'm a central community manager, and my stake is, well, it's the idea of our games, but every game has their own community manager, has their own community team. Like Fawn is working with Crusader Kings, and it is her job to process the feedback that all of you give her. To me, it's a bit of a broader company level. I would say, I fully embrace this label. I am a bit of a corporate drone, in all honesty. For example, what I listen to and talk about with our fans is our business model, DLCs, which we know is always a lively subject of conversation in our community. For example, when we acquire a studio or announce a title, we might announce a title that is not necessarily on the radar of our core community. Right. For example, what happened when we announced Stellaris Console Edition first. It was our first Grand Strategy console port, and there was a lot of discussion about it on just a company level, not just Stellaris, right, as a whole. But there was like, oh, Paradox is going to dumb down their games, right? Everything is going to be freaking simplified now. It's going to be games for children. Here comes PG3, and all of that is everything we have heard. We had to listen to it. So my job was, on one hand, to give that feedback to my colleagues, who were part Stellaris team, part also other stakeholders who are more in charge of our business as a whole, our building our, as we call it, game portfolio, right? And on the other hand, I was there to answer the questions that the fans had. You know, I had to explain why it wasn't actually the case that the games would be dumbed down. I would say a few years down the line, nobody will say that Stellaris is a simpler game than it was 2 years ago. And the Stellaris console port was very successful. And you know, going forward, we'll probably have other conversations. I can't imagine this was our last major console port. I can't imagine we will not want to try to expand to other platforms in the future. So another thing we are doing right now in terms of our business model is, instead of just to clarify, so that again nobody has a heart attack, DLCs are a big part of how we run our company, and they're not going anywhere. But it's good sense to have some backups in case there is like a major market shift. Suddenly there's like an apocalyptic change.
Everybody hates grand strategy games now. Yeah, it's over.
Yeah, exactly. So what we do, for example, let's say in 3 years DLCs are dead. They're just not monetizing anymore. So we are looking at some other things, like for example, Xbox Game Pass, right? How do subscription services work? Maybe there are some other things we are discussing that I can't discuss here. So it's what I'm trying to do is try to just look at our community globally, where they are right now, aside from just our games, right? What other games that are similar in scope to ours are being released out there? What are their business models? What is the reception to those business models, for example? And I try to dig out this feedback and send it to my colleagues to tell them, you know, they like this, they don't really like that. Like, let's be careful before we try to do something similar. So it's essentially the same process in terms of just gathering feedback. It's just that I send it to different people, and it's not so much about the game experience as it is about the Paradox experience in total.
I feel like at the same time, it does have a major impact on the devs, though, at the end of the day, whatever the data says, because when we, for example, look at the DLC cycles, I mean, they've changed dramatically as well, with EU4 having many DLCs, CK2 having many DLC as the first basic DLC model that Paradox had. And we now look at CK3, when we look at Stellaris, it results basically in completely different dev cycles, right? So at the end of the day, there's still a massive impact that you have on how the devs do their work.
Yes, although, just to clarify before I say something that is not true, I'm not as heavily embedded in the actual design and production process. A lot of that also comes internally. We take a look and say, no, this game we've been doing, let's say CK2, right?
Yeah.
Let's compare CK2 to CK3. We did a lot of stuff. I would argue that CK2 is probably the game that really built our business model, the current one. And we did X number of DLCs. And we're like, yeah, but maybe let's take a look at a bit at maybe how Stellaris did it. Maybe we can do something with that. Maybe we can do fewer of them, but a little bit differently. With maybe we can focus on scope more and have them sell more. Our community is a bit different now, so not all those decisions are made just due to feedback and desires. Sometimes it's also about our colleagues wanting to be efficient and wanting to do things in a certain way, and maybe that way is a little bit different to where their priorities were, like say 5 years ago. Because ultimately, a big part of it, when you are in a games industry, it's a very creative industry, and there are lots of creative people. And then they don't want to make stuff just with a financial goal in mind. Right. They also want to do stuff in a way that makes them happy that they're doing it. It's a bit of an idealized way, but it is it is a part of that process and of that decision making. Not every DLC
Yeah.
that will be made only because it makes business sense. Not every game that will be greenlit will be made only because it makes business sense. If you looked at just pure numbers, right, for let's say Wiki 2, why the hell would we make Wiki 3?
Right. I think it is a really interesting angle because, for example, Matthew, who was on last week, has very strong opinions on what he would love to work on when it comes to CK3. So I think it really mirrors what you say there as well, that you basically don't, you know, if you want to just be a programmer, you can just go like to a bank and do your job there. But if you want to work on stuff as a programmer that you really enjoy, then obviously the games industry is a much more adequate location to be.
Do you also have a strong opinions on CK3 DLCs? Is there anything you would like us to make? Come on, confirm something.
No, leave me out of this.
It's you know, like the thing is, I think Matthew's dream basically came true because I remember before launch, after launch, he always said, "I really want to do more roleplay stuff." And then Royal Code is like, "Hey, here's roleplay. How you doing?"
Yeah, like to be fair, I think I told you this. My favorite CK2 DLC was Way of Life, and that essentially, at least from my perspective, again, I wasn't there when the decision was being made, but me looking at it as a fan, it's CK3 it uses Way of Life as the very core of its experience, right, and it turns into a whole game that it will be that will only keep on building on. So I agree with Matthew on that note, absolutely.
The entire game of CK3 is much more tailored around roleplay and I never know how this comes across, both for people that watch it and also for the people that work on the games, but I definitely like basically Sims Medieval. That's, you know, where I'm coming from on Crusader Kings 3. I'm very happy about it, you know, I love that it went that way, but I also feel like there's a lot of prejudice, basically, when somebody says in the Grand Strategy community, make it like The Sims, but I think it's a good thing. I think this is where it needs to be. So the interesting thing is actually, 1.5 hours have passed, and we only were able to scratch the surface of both the technical, the human, and then the dev interactions. But I think I will have to go in future streams. We'll have to go further into the details of the particular projects. If there's anything that either of you still want to bring up just for this stream, then feel free right now. Otherwise, if anybody in chat has a question, then let me know right now. Feel free to ping me. I will see the question. But yeah, is there anything you want to bring up in particular that maybe we haven't touched on?
One thing I'd like to say is that I know a lot of people are very interested in working in community because, you know, talking to the fans can be a really fun experience, and meeting fans at like conventions and stuff and talking to them day to day, it can be a really wonderful networking experience. And I think a lot of people are put off or worried by the fact that when we in community, people think that we deal a lot with trolls, right? I mean, a lot of people say to me, I don't know how you work in community because you must be attacked by trolls all the time, and I don't know how you deal with the whining or blah, blah, blah. And in reality, community isn't like that. We don't really actually see a lot of negativity or toxicity. And I must say, over the past 2 years that I've been here, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. You know, I feel the vast majority of my interactions with the community have ended up on a positive note, and they've really uplifted my mood and made me look forward to the next day. There's rarely ever been a day where I've thought, oh, I don't want to turn my computer on and face the community because they're mad and upset and they hate me. That's just not really a thing that happens.
Right.
I kind of agree. Again, it might be because we are a little bit biased, Fawn, because this is like most of our games industry experience is Paradox, right? So maybe we do live in a bubble. But I really do think, like I said previously, I'll just repeat myself, our community is probably one of the more chill ones out there. So yeah, thank you everyone for being kind to us.
Let me see. Do we talk about the Discord bot and Fawn? We have talked about the Discord bot and Fawn and how big of an impact it has had on PDXCON and making the events surrounding PDXCON possible. As well as hopefully in the future, fingers crossed, maybe some Q&As. Speaking, it was mentioned earlier that the topic of betas, I just want to say that next week, if everything goes well, I will be talking You know, there's a joke here, and it's so stupid. I will be talking to an absolute alpha. I will never do that joke again. This is the sorry about that. It just came to my mind. But the thing is, we're gonna be talking to Nick, who works in QA, which is of course related, not very much not a beta in terms of what is done in the job, but is very much related to the topic of taking care and making sure that the game works as designed. So that might be interested for that as well. There's a tangentially related question, I guess. There was a bid from Microsoft to buy Discord. Would you prefer a big company like Microsoft to own Discord or an upcoming studio in terms of added value to your work?
Fawn, what do you think?
I mean, I remember that being everyone talking about that for a day, but I thought it was a complete meme. I didn't actually look into it. Like, I thought it was a joke. I honestly am not sure, but if they do to Discord what they did to MSN, then no, I don't want it.
Right, okay.
I have actually kind of a little bit of a different opinion because based on if I remember correctly, and again maybe I just misremembering, I think Microsoft owns LinkedIn now, and again very like a maybe odd platform to bring up, but LinkedIn has been great since Microsoft took it up. Very different purpose, admittedly. What could be beneficial if it was Microsoft would probably be better integration with some other platforms, their own, and that always makes things a little bit easier, I suppose, when you are trying to build a global community. But at the same time, I've been looking at some revenue numbers Discord has been getting. Part of that is probably COVID. Part is because the platform is just growing well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they are doing amazing. Like, is there a need for them to sell, or maybe they suspect they will be peaking, and maybe then.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if I would sell at all the way they are going, because it's going great.
It is a very strong platform in how they came in. They did have, it's also a good example because Discord is of course not a game developer, but they are related to it, and they tried the game store, right? And that didn't work out, whatever the numbers were. Not that I know of that, but they moved on to this different format where they basically say, hey, this is a platform where anybody can have their server, of course, but also it's the prime platform when it comes to especially gaming companies that want to talk to their community and communicate with them.
I really think, like, I don't know if this is your perspective too, Fawn, but so far, as far as globally available social media platforms, the one social media platform that was disproportionately populated by gamers was Twitter. I don't know if those of you who are watching realize Twitter is a fairly small social media network. It's like 350 million monthly active users. Instagram is over 1 billion. Facebook is like 2.5 billion. So it is a fairly small platform, but to us, the gaming industry is like our hub of choice. The gaming industry is hyperactive, hyper present on Twitter, and there has been no real alternative to it for years. Twitch is kind of there, but really Twitch's focus is different. They didn't go too deep into like a community building tool development. So Discord is really the first activity we have had, first alternative we have had in years to Twitter. Admittedly, the platform style and type is different, but this I think is one of the reasons why it will continue to grow. Because, like, again, I am not an analyst, but I didn't see Twitter really picking up the pace in terms of catching up to other platforms in terms of just global reach, and we will see. Like, who knows? In 5 years, maybe we'll be looking at a landscape when there is no Twitter anymore, or maybe there is something else. Maybe it's integrated with something else, and it's good to have an alternative like Discord. And I would say probably people owning Discord realize that they are the alternative, and they are in a pretty strong place and position.
Right. I got one more question here from an unknown user. Let me I think the name is pronounced Trinex. General advice for someone looking to get into the community management with PDX or otherwise.
I would say that networking is a very important aspect of community. The more people you know, the more chances that you'll find jobs, because everyone I've ever met who works in community knows someone else in community in some other company. It's like a giant spider web of knowing everyone. And if you can get your foot onto that spider web by befriending the right person, then you never know what opportunities that could lead to.
I would say what we actually alluded to at the beginning when we said that me and Fawn are a little bit unusual cases. I think in the Paradox's community team, I think I'm the only person who got in without having a previous connection with someone in the company. So, and just for the record, this doesn't mean you have to know an employee, right? What has been a very good entry point for our colleagues in the community team, both remote contractors and internally, has been content creation. So we have a few YouTubers and streamers that are on the community team right now, and that honestly is like a great way to build your skill, especially nowadays. Again, the internet has matured a little bit, and there is a little more expectation that if you're a content creator and you want to work with a game developer or publisher, you're also a little bit of a community manager, right? You need to manage your community, you need to make sure they are not toxic, because then someone might not want to work with you. And that is a great test run and great practice before applying for a community-oriented position, for sure.
You heard it here first. Become a content creator. You can score a job. It's actually really interesting to me because, as you said, it's not just that the content creators as a whole have changed in terms of what is expected from them and their community, but also and I mean honestly, like I have high expectations myself for my community, completely independent of what possible gaming companies could think about. When it comes to that, it is also something, of course, where you as a content creator have to be happy with your platform that you have. But I think it's also interesting because there's a lot more today that goes into making videos compared to when it all started out. I mean, I did it. I don't recommend it for about a year and a half. I just did Let's Plays. I wouldn't recommend it. Do something that like comes in with more work. It's more fun because it's more challenging. You learn more. You pick more skills up. But at the same time, I think also it's just it will leave you with more creativity when it comes to coming up for what you might do if you were in an actual corporate position compared to being on your own.
I would say, like, speaking of like what job opportunities content creation opens, like be it YouTube or Twitch, right? There are some other paths it opens. Right now we have a colleague who has recently, like a year ago now, I think, started working with our live content team. So streaming, just learning to work with hardware, streaming software is probably a very good segue into that career. If more pre-produced videos are more of your thing, then probably content producer is an option. And just to clarify, because I know sometimes there is confusion about what those role names mean, a content producer is someone who, for example, makes trailers, videos. For example, those videos might have seen that are summarizing dev diaries for some of our games. Or another sort of pre-recorded, more scripted piece of content. It's a little bit between live content team and content producers to make sure those things are delivered. So content creators, you have a few paths if you want to get into this industry.
All right, so basically, make sure that people know you in the sense that they trust you, that you're not, because it's always easier, let's be honest here, to find a footing if somebody knows that you're a good candidate, instead of you having them from zero having to say, hey, please, let's have an interview and so on. Then on top of that, what was mentioned before was the topic of, for example, doing work that is basically freelancing. I mean, even if it's not work, if it's just hobby, be that moderating, so that you have some sort of experience in community management, and then just luck, I suppose, right? That's where it continues onwards. Then
that's true for me, for sure. The luck part.
Memed himself into Paradox. All right, we got we got a lot of topics, and I gotta bite my tongue here. I have to be honest with you, because we're looking at a situation where I think when it comes to both the technical side and the actual human side of what is done and how does it all work, there's so much more that could be discussed, that could be on the plate, but I think we have to postpone that for something else. There was a lot of interesting info in here when it comes to how to interact with the community, how to deal, what of course the expectations are for the devs, and how to implement all of that together in a grand plan, how to hand out 10,000 keys in just 1 month. A lot of things that came up. Thank you too for being on.
Thanks for having us.
I appreciate you inviting us.
All right.
Thank you for watching, everyone.
Yeah, have a good one, everybody. Have a good evening. And I think we'll see one another later. Have a good one. Cheers.